Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, I want you to answer a question, and we're not going to filter or edit. We're just going to try and answer the question, and I invite you to do a brain dump here. If you are listening to me while you're driving or walking or something where you don't have a piece of paper, ideally you can just sort of spit out some ideas that are in your head. But tell me how you would finish this sentence. If I had more help, I'd ... What is it that you would do, think, feel, ask for help with? We're going to explore this question today because so often we are feeling like we need more help, wanting more help. And I would 100% support that if you are listening to this podcast and you've been here a while, that you are probably somebody who does not have adequate help immediately helping you. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about looking for help in the places that currently exist. But let's just acknowledge that, generally speaking, women physicians are less resourced than physicians have been in the past and than our male colleagues typically. There are many reasons for this, which we have talked about before. There is the socialization piece of, well, you should just be a team player and you should just be able to manage this because we expect women to be able to manage more and differently than men. There are pieces of it like we don't typically need a chaperone to do pelvic exams. But meanwhile, a chaperone to do pelvic exams is an extra set of hands in the room who might be labeling the sample, maybe putting in orders, maybe handing you little things so you can go faster, right? There are pieces there that are helpful that are not simply about the chaperone. And again, that is something that we typically are lacking. There are a lot of facets to that, but we're not going to get stuck in that today. What I want to really think about are, again, sort of what your answers would be, and what it is that you'll tell yourself will be different in your life if you had more help. Okay, so let's think about that part first, because we tend to think that we are just going to feel happy, less frustrated, and just magically better if we had more help. And I think it's really important for this conversation that we aren't gaslighting ourselves into thinking that we don't deserve help, and that we aren't going to have any grand illusions either about, well, suddenly if I had more help, I would magically be, completely content and everything would just flow easily. And the only reason I'm not happy in my life is because I don't have help. Let's not get into that pattern of thinking because we're really trying to figure out what are the stories in our brain around help. So let's think, if you had more help, what comes to mind immediately? And sort of thinking about if you had more help with the current tasks that you have, and that can be tasks at work, tasks at home, the kind of current load that you manage in your life, what would the outcome be? Would you do more? Would you see more patients? Would you spend more time doing self-care? Would you not know what to do with yourself, right? And an extra free time if you had more help and support with the things that you manage? Would you be caught up? It's important to do this part, which again is something that we don't often think about, because we have stories in our brain about what would happen if we had more help. And sometimes those stories are helpful and, it creates some motivation, some inspiration. And sometimes they are not. And I would argue that if you're telling yourself, if I had more help, then I would need to do more work. I would need to see more patients. I would stay on top of this inbox. I would be pulling my weight. If your story follows that theme, you are definitely not going to be inclined to accept help because that doesn't sound like a good outcome. It might sound like you'd magically be more productive and more efficient. But ultimately, it sounds also like you're going to be doing more work, right? And I would argue that none of us feels really truly like we want to be doing more work. We might be wanting to work differently. Might be wanting to have more support, right, for the work that we do, but we don't want to do that. And the default acceptance is just that we have more work. I would argue that most of us, probably 99.9% of us, are doing more work than we are given credit for already. And yes, we face social pressures at work and probably at home and probably at large in our lives that because we are so good at doing work, that we should just do more and manage more. Most of us, we don't want that. We actually probably want more time and space to be doing human things, to be doing things with people that we love, to be engaged with hobbies, to be able to take care of ourselves, right? To exercise, to eat right, um, to feel connected to other humans. So if we are telling ourselves that story, that if I had more help, I feel like I would be able to start that exercise program. I feel like I would be able to, be reasonably caught up or have good boundaries around my time or something. That is likely, or at least more likely, to pull us in a direction of actually seeking and engaging help. I know, and you know, that even when we have helpful people around us or people who are supposed to be helping us, that it is not always easy to actually get the kind of help and support that we need, right? That is one reason why we may not have accepted help that is available to us. But we need to be able to feel that we would do things that are good for ourselves if we had more help and support. But again, just recognizing that sometimes the help and the support we need is not exactly the flavor that feels like it will actually be helpful and supportive. So, what is the story that you tell yourself to complete the sentence? If I had more help, I'd fill in the blank. Okay. What is that for you? Now let's think also about what are the actual things that you would like help with. Now, again, you might have to split into two buckets of thinking about work and thinking about home, whatever home is to you, whatever the non work parts of your life are. So, at work, what are the things that you would actually like help with? Do you need help rooming patients? Do you need more help managing your inbox? Do you need more help of people taking ownership for the care, being a part of the care team and actually lifting more off of your plate? Um, do you need more support in actually seeing the patients in some way, either because there are too numerous many patients for you to see, and maybe you're constantly being double booked and walk-ins and things like that? Maybe too, it's that you are doing all of the lifting in the visits because you don't have adequate support to be able to, you know, um, have them, actually walk into the room, have the room set up in the ways that you need it to be in order to be able to complete the care that you provide. Maybe you need some more help with your documentation, such as a real life scribe or an AI scribe. What are the actual things? As you look at that list, I want you to think about too, are these discrete tasks? Are they things that are adding to your cognitive load, right? More decisions, more management, more support that way, right? Because that will also help to distinguish where you're struggling. And it might be both, but it's important for your brain to be able to understand what those things are. Okay. Similarly, at home, do you need more help with actually executing tasks like, I don't know, cleaning or errands or things like that? Or do you need more help and support on the cognitive side? Perhaps you, like many people, are the one who is managing in your head. Oh, has everybody, had their checkup? Are they up to date with their dental stuff? Oh, gosh, it's COVID flu shot season. Are we scheduled for that? Do I need to take my car in for service, right? Managing those things. Oh, we have to decide on what we're going to have for dinner. And oh, looks like we're out of dish soap. Those things are different than pure tasks. I know in my family, I have, I'm going to say, very decent support around tasks. So things that need to get done. My husband's he's really good, actually, I should say. He's really good at house maintenance stuff. He is really good at, executing on dinner. I have to prompt a little bit more for things that require decisions of helping to figure out, okay, like what are we actually going to eat this week? And, keeping up on supplies of things and scheduling checkups and dental cleaning, things like that. So when I was doing this exercise earlier, I was thinking, yeah, I could really use more cognitive load support in figuring out, all right, how do we manage these things? It's again important to figure out what it is that you actually need so that you can be clear with whatever help you're going to engage. So, whether that is you being very explicit with staff at work about what needs to happen, maybe you need to create some kind of a checklist. I know I just gave you another task, but if you are trying to teach someone who is new and inexperienced, or perhaps somebody who, was working with someone else and they were used to that person's style, but now they're working with you and you need to, kind of bring them onto your team, right? So that they are actually providing you the support. Doing something like creating a very clear checklist may be something that is very helpful. Similarly, if you have kids at home and you're trying to help them learn how to take on tasks, right? It's going to be helpful to be very clear, what are those tasks and what are the steps involved in doing those tasks. One of the things that I often talk about with my coaching clients is this idea that we all walk around, and this is not something I invented, but we all walk around with our own instruction manual in our head, right? This set of instructions on, this is how I load the dishwasher. This is how I, plan meals for the week or organize my closet, whatever those things are. And of course, we tend to think that our way of doing things is right. Now, let's allow for some flexibility there. There is probably not one thing that is right or wrong, but when you think about what you need help with, we need to figure out, all right, what am I actually asking for? I want to be clear with the people that I'm trying to pass tasks off to. What does done look like? I need to decide how much micromanaging is important. Now, dishwashers, right? Many of us have different approaches to dishwashers, right? There is the person who knows how to very clearly pack it in such a way that it is exactly perfect, which way the plates need to go and which way the bowls, and this is how it's optimized for our dishwasher, and this is how I can get the absolute most dishes into the dishwasher, right? We might be carrying that energy with us. And we ask for help from kids, spouse, whoever, roommates, whatever we are dealing with. They don't do it the same way. sometimes we're going to need to stop and ask ourselves, is it really important that it's done my way? Or is it more important that the task is offloaded from me? I would argue that there are a lot of circumstances where the offloading of the task is more important than it be done in a very discreet way. Now, again, there are going to be situations, possibly at work and possibly at home, where it is very critical to do a task in a certain way because there is some very clear rationale or reasoning behind it, right? There are going to be those. But I think that some of us who err on the little control freak side might need to ratchet down my way or the highway in order to actually get more help and support. So as you look at your tasks, you may come up with a checklist. You may come up with, what is the simplest definition of done here, right? If I am asking my kids to start cleaning the bathroom, I have in my head what that looks like. They have in their head whatever that looks like, and I'm gonna hazard a guess that they probably do not match, right? But if I am clear, okay, that means that the toilet and the sink have been cleaned, and that there's a particular order to go in there. It means that there are fresh towels, and it means that the mirror has been cleaned, right? If I can help offload some of that, right, then I'm going to help myself, but I'm not going to have to micromanage, right? They're going to need some guidance, but I'm not going to sit there and micromanage. That's possibly a bad example because my OCD self is currently thinking, oh, you know, there's a certain way to do it. That's a reflection of my brain, my friends. We're going to need to decide how we will be okay with ourselves in offloading some tasks that are not life and death, that are not critical to be done in a certain way, but that you do have some expectations around what doing this task involves. Perhaps less loaded than the dishwasher or the bathrooms, and maybe a good place to start is, what does it look like for kids to pick up their rooms, right? Again, I, in my brain, have an idea of what that looks like. My kids will have a different idea of what that looks like. Similarly, think about at work. If you ask your MA to room the patient, what do you mean, right? And what do they mean? Because they might think, well, rooming the patient means that I bring this human into the room and I check their blood pressure and then I'm done. But rooming the patient for you may be, yes, you bring that human back. Yes, you confirm their name and date of birth, right? So we make sure that we are in the right chart. The chart is open. It will be secured before you exit the room. That we allow the patient to sit for a few minutes. That we confirm the reason for their visit. Write any notes that may be helpful for the physician, such as the side of the body that we're dealing with. That we confirm the medications, if that's part of the job, right? The medication reconciliation, right? That if we see that here's my family medicine, if we see there's any preventative items coming up, that we might mention, or we have some kind of a process perhaps in our clinic, if it's COVID and flu shot season, that perhaps we are offering the patient a COVID and flu shot. Those might all be things on the list for your mind when someone is rooming a patient, but that might not be on the MA's mind. Okay. And so sometimes we're going to need to help that person sort of think through, these are the tasks that need to happen, and then I will come in. This is work that has to be done up front. And this is a key reason why we do not always engage help, right? We carry around the story in our brain of what it is that we think that we'll gain when we'll have more help. And again, sometimes that's a helpful story and sometimes it is not a helpful story. So we need to do some work there. But also, it involves some work, some teaching, some mentoring, some feedback, some coaching for performance when we are trying to offload tasks. That is a natural part. And my goal here is not to highlight that there's more work for you, but just to acknowledge that this is a reason why we get stuck, right? We say, I'm too busy to do that, but we will stay stuck in that pattern. And because we look like we're managing it all, that we have our crap together, right? And that there's nothing we can't do, we look that way, that we always say yes. People don't know that we are not managing all, that we do feel overwhelmed, that we do feel frustrated, right? Until it's too late. So we are going to let go of that. We are going to embrace, if I'm going to get more help, if I'm going to get the support that I need, I'm going to need to do some of that work with the person who has taken over the tasks. And I will decide, is it really important for me to micromanage and be very clear? Is it important for the task to be done, and done is better than perfect? How can I help support this person to take over in such a way that it is actually helpful for me? That's the goal, right? We don't just want boxes clicked. We want it to actually be helpful for us. So that's the task side of things. What about the cognitive load, right? There are probably things that you can identify that would help decrease the cognitive load. And again, sometimes there is some work and some investment here of helping to figure out, how do I make this easier? I'm going to give you a few very simple examples, and I hope that you will sort of see these as tools that you could use to help reduce the cognitive load, but I'm sure we could come up with a lot more. And I'm sure we could have a very spirited debate about whether or not it's fair or right or just that you are carrying all this cognitive load. But we're going to table that because that won't help us here today. What are ways that I can reduce my cognitive load? Sometimes having a very simple list of things that are common decisions that need to be made. So let me give you the example of the dinner, right? There are probably different foods that you turn to in different seasons, right? We are hitting the fall of 2025, right? It is, I don't know, I always think of that as like soup season, right? People talk about, or some people are going to call it pumpkin spice season. That is not how I roll. So I'm going to call it soup season, right? And I think more about those kinds of squashes and sweet potato. I don't know. I think more about those kinds of foods, right, that are harvested as opposed to summertime. We've got more fresh tomatoes and more tender leafy greens and strawberries and things like that, right? As you move from season to season, you might keep a very simple list of, here's a set of dinners that we typically like, that are typically featuring ingredients that are easy to get at this time of year, right? You might have a very simple rotation that you can turn to. And especially if you've got people in your household who have very particular tastes, right? That you sort of shift this over each season, right? So that you've got perhaps 4 or 5 different seasons for what kinds of foods are fresh and available. And, or maybe it's not seasons as we think about them, but maybe it's other types of seasons. Maybe you've got kids who do sports or theater or band or something, and the amount of time that you have during those periods of time is different, right, than how it is at other times of the year, right? So you can think about what makes the most sense for you. But again, having a list of, let's say, 10 to 20 different meals, some of which are going to be quicker and easier than others, but ones that you can have in steady rotation for whatever those seasons look like, right? For busier seasons, you might have more things that are very little cooking or prep, right? And for times of the year where there's not as much going on, or there's food that you really want to make that takes a little bit more time, right? Then we have a list over here. When I'm working with my patients on weight management, a lot of the medications that we use make people much less hungry, especially in the middle of the day. And for my folks, especially with ADHD, they find themselves often going through the day and they ate breakfast, but they find themselves at 3 or 4 p.m. really, really hungry, right? Because they didn't stop to eat, right? They were either just not hungry and just worked through, they got really focused on something. And we talk about having a short list of snacks and setting ourselves an alarm so that if we're not hungry to stop and have lunch, we are going to stop and have a snack. And I tell people, I want you to have 3 snacks that are easy, that are, things that you can stock. You can keep some at work, you can keep some at home or, in your bag. Maybe one of those things is something very simple like a bar, but the other times it's going to be, you know, um, cheese sticks and an apple, or, some nuts and some dried fruit, or some hummus and some veggie sticks, right? Have a short list of things that you really like and some kind of a prompt of like, okay, I'm not hungry for a major lunch, right? But I have a short list. I don't have to think about it. I just have a very small menu of items to pick from, right? That reduces cognitive load. And it's just a kind way to sort of fuel our bodies differently when something has changed. Having little tools that you can turn to like that can be really helpful. Similar kind of silly, but helpful thing is having your clothes all generally in sort of matching shapes or colors, right? Not that you're wearing necessarily the same thing every day, but that that generally speaking, you wear a few different colors kind of very often, and they all go with these other colors. I tend to wear clothes that are green, blue, black, and gray, and a little bit of navy. I occasionally sprinkle in other colors, but so many of my clothes are just really mix and match because those are the colors that I know work for me. And I did this years ago. And again, it's not that I don't have a few other things in other colors, but I'll tell you, I don't wear them that often because they are harder for me to match and it takes more thinking. So if you open my closet, you will see a fairly consistent color scheme with a few other things thrown in. Why did I do that? Because I got tired of trying to mix and match and, try and get my clothes to work. I wanted to reduce the cognitive load, right? There are ways that we can do that will simplify our lives. Now, I'm giving you some very sort of superficial examples. There are probably any number of other things that we can come up with that would also reduce the cognitive load. Um, you can think about when you are dealing with certain clinical situations, right? There's there's a menu of things that you offer, and there's probably a menu of things that you don't offer, right? When someone comes in with low back pain, perhaps the things that you offer are, well, we can do physical therapy, we can do a referral to massage, we can do this NSAID and, maybe this muscle relaxant, but what's not on my menu is I don't prescribe opiates for that. I don't do dry needling because I don't know how, right? There are things that you offer and don't offer. And again, we can sort of take this idea and bring it to other areas of our life so that we can streamline and make things easier. All right. So this was a different way for us to think about what are the parts here about help that I would like to ponder, right? So if I had more help, what is the story that we're telling ourselves would happen? What would the outcome actually be? Are we telling ourselves that we would see more patients and that we would work harder? Are we telling ourselves that we would be making time for ourselves, that we would exercise or spend time with people that we love? That we would be caught up, that we'd be happy, that we'd be content, that we would never be frustrated. Like, really allow yourself to fill in the blank and sort of test the veracity, if you will, of the story that you're telling yourself. The goal here is not gaslighting or illusion. The goal is really to understand what your brain thinks is, kind of the story and how we can shift that to be more helpful. So often we are telling ourselves that I'd be happy if I had more help, but sometimes help sort of pops up and we don't think about these other parts of it, and we sort of tell ourselves that help should just know what to do, and it doesn't, or, we're holding on a little bit too tightly and wanting to micromanage, and help disappears. So being really clear on what we think the outcome will be and maybe what we want the outcome to be. I'd love to have more help and support at home so that I could spend more time doing things that I enjoy and more time, feeling connected with the people in my family, right? So those are things that would be important to me. And I can spend some time sort of reflecting on what would that look like? What is the actual help? What are the actual tasks? What is the cognitive load items, right, that may be helpful? And that might be at work or at home to get me to my goal. I can spend some time thinking about like, what are the actual tasks? Again, either at work or home, do I need to outline them for somebody? Is there somebody who's supposed to be doing these things, who's there and capable of doing these things, but maybe we've just not really sat and talked about it. We've not had clear communication. We've not had expectations. Perhaps I have tried to get said people, whether again, that's at work or at home, to take on tasks, and they have demonstrated they're not willing or capable of doing those things. All right, I'm going to have to think of something else, right? That might be having uncomfortable conversations with people. It, might be deciding, well, because I can't get help and support with these things, I am going to do less because my peace and sanity is, really important, right? There's different sort of boundaries issues that can come up there. And thinking through, like, how can I reduce my cognitive load, right? Because so much of what we struggle with is carrying all these things in our brain, right? And I can just about guarantee that there are ways that we can reduce our cognitive load, reduce our cognitive distress, and help ourselves. I hope that you'll sit and spend a little time with this and try and figure out where you're feeling blocked. Um, and for some of us, it's going to be, well, I don't actually know what I would do if I had more help. I don't know how I'd spend my time. If that's true for you, I want to give you a big hug, and I want you to acknowledge that you have been so socialized to feel like you should be working all the time, right? That you don't need any help, that we've often forgot those human parts of ourselves. Um, you are not broken. You are not alone. And allow yourself to get the help in the form of guidance, whatever that looks like, to be able to figure out who you are, what you like to do, and how to feel whole as a human. That might be working with a coach or a therapist. It might be having some heart-to-heart conversations with people that you're close to. There are many ways to approach that. So, my friends, again, I hope I've given you something helpful to think about. I know that just in sort of talking through it today, I've got some challenges to sort of think through. And I'm going to do it because it is so important to me that we find ways to not only find meaning in our work, which I do think is important, but also meaning at home, meaning in our lives, right? Figuring out who we are. We've come through our medical training. We are in, some state of working and taking care of people and hopefully figuring out how to take care of ourselves after often a very long time without doing that. We are all works in progress. And what I want for you is to be able to use these tools to be able to create more of what you want in your life and to be able to have just a very realistic and practical way to realize some of the ways that our medical training has worked on us and to shed ourselves of some of the disillusionment that has followed from everything. Hope that makes sense. Makes sense to me, but I'm in my brain. My friends, thank you as always for listening. If you have some thoughts or questions for me, or some reflections, or anything that you'd like to share, you can reach me at my email address, which is Megan, Megan, at healthierforgood.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.